Carnaval.
Hello and welcome to the Privacy Corner with Privado AI. I'm Robert Bateman. I'm a writer, a commentator on privacy and data protection, or a privacy evangelist, as some clients like to call me. I'm here with Suchakra Sharma, my apologies, who is the chief scientist at Privado. He has a background in cybersecurity and a PhD in computer engineering, and he's now working on some of the core privacy issues of the times. So this is Privacy Corner. It's a weekly live stream running here on LinkedIn every week, same time, same day. We also provide an accompanying newsletter, which I'm working on. I used to have lots of subscribers to my own newsletter, so if you missed that, then sign up for the Privado Privacy Corner newsletter, because I'm really enjoying working on that. And we're going to go a bit deeper on some of the news items that come up each week, and then talk about a bit of a deep dive on one specific topic, this week being AI governance. And sometimes we'll have guests too. So Suchakra, you're with me today. Tell me a bit about your week. How are things going for you at Privado AI?
Hey, thanks, Robert. Thanks for having me here. So I think things are going smooth. We continue to build our privacy scanning features that are in our product, and our customers continue to become secure and privacy compliant. We also launched a contract scanning piece, which is in beta for our customers, so they can scan their contracts and it identifies risks and compliance in those. So that's what's going on. Pretty smooth this week.
Great, sure. So contract scanning, and that's an AI use case, I think, that can be really
Yeah, they
helpful.
would be used in that. So we would use AI for scanning the contracts and understanding what was the intention, and then what are you actually doing there? Are you violating something, in your document there?
Good. Yes. I mean, I think that's a potentially good area for people to use this tech. Anyway, we'll get into that later. I will just say at the outset, don't plug sensitive information directly into ChatGPT. Use something tailored to your own businesses.
Indeed.
Yeah. Okay. So we're going to do a quick roundup of a few news items now, before going on to talk a bit more about AI governance. Now, we've had a lot going on this week. Firstly, the Court of Justice of the European Union decided loads of GDPR cases recently. I'm just going to talk briefly about 3 of them. Now, they've got these really catchy case titles in the EU. So we've got C487/21. I hope you're taking notes, everyone. If someone makes a subject access request, then you have to provide a copy of the data. This came up when the controller tried to provide a summary of personal data about the applicant. Now, the court clarified that copies of documents are required if they're, in scope of the request. You can obviously, you must redact them. All the normal exemptions and exceptions apply, but there's an actual copy of the data you'll need to provide. So that really hammers home how good data governance has to be to fully comply with data subject rights. Now, briefly, the next case, C321, was about the private right of action, as you might call it, stateside under the GDPR. People can't sue you for any old GDPR violation. It has to affect them personally, and there has to be some damage. So this is material or non-material damage. So non-material damage is normally emotional harm, something like that. The GDPR doesn't set a minimum threshold for that. There's no, number of millimeters of tears that are required to be cried before you can take a case to court. But obviously that doesn't mean people are going to, well, I hope it doesn't mean people will be bringing frivolous cases. It's just that GDPR itself doesn't set a threshold. And finally, C6022. People obviously under the GDPR have the right to have personal data about them erased under certain conditions. One of those conditions is where the controller is processing the data unlawfully. Now, if you haven't been keeping up to date with your ROPA or your joint controllership agreements, so that's Article 30 and 26, these accountability requirements, that doesn't give rise to this right to erasure in itself. That's not what the GDPR means by unlawful processing in this context. So these are all quite fundamental points about the GDPR. And some of them I'm quite surprised the court actually bothered to rule on, but there are some nuances in each of them. Suchakra, we're coming up to 5 years now of GDPR enforcement this month, and the courts are still answering these quite basic questions about how the law works. Do you think that this stuff is ever going to be settled, or is it going to continue to evolve?
So I think the nature of GDPR articles that we have seen, it leaves a lot of room for engineering level implementation details that are being debated. So people don't really know exactly how this has to be implemented at a very core engineering level. So I think at this moment the issue of privacy is really important, and the intentions of GDPR, which are actually quite clear, they are being tested right now. So it's at the 5 year mark. We are actually now really testing what was meant by each article inside the GDPR. So cases will now pick up steam. We can see that both new ones as well as the old ones that we have been discussing. And I believe that each judgment will make things more clearer as we progress in those cases. So, for example, you mentioned one of these cases where there was an actual copy of data that was, required, and not just the summary. So now this crystallizes the intention of these are tools or data subject access requests that come from customers, that what they should deliver. It doesn't mean that it can be a summary. It crystallizes that. So I think that's what's going to happen. Yeah, I mean, it's 5 years now. The rubber is the tire is hitting the road, and the rubber is burning. That's what I would say.
Yeah, so you mentioned there the kind of engineering aspect to it, and I suppose that as technology keeps evolving, we're going to have to keep looking again at these topics, even if they are quite basic building blocks of the law. The surrounding context changes the practical implementation of these principles, I guess. So we're likely to keep revisiting these concepts like the right of access and so on. So next thing I wanted to mention was the FTC, which just last week. Now, those who are paying attention will know that the FTC is quite active at the moment. We've had, this is the Federal Trade Commission in the US. We've had enforcement action a couple of times this year from them on privacy issues, and they are taking aim at Meta once again. This would be the third order against Meta, previously Facebook, that the FTC has issued. And what they are proposing is an order that would ban Meta from monetizing data about users under 18, among some other measures. Now, that's not normally the kind of threshold for childhood in the US, which makes this particularly interesting. Normally, we're talking about under 13-year-olds under laws like the Children's Online Privacy Protection Act. So the FTC says that Meta violated an order that they gave it in 2020, and the company has allegedly misled parents about who children could communicate with via their Messenger Kids platform. I confess I wasn't familiar with that Meta product myself. And they also allegedly misrepresented how developers could access private data on Facebook after the Cambridge Analytica scandal. I think this was only for quite a short period, but the FTC says that Meta was not honest about the access to data there. So Suchakra, on a technical level, we're talking here about data about a kind of specific group of users. So how can companies make sure they're treating different types of data appropriately, like kids' data, sensitive data?
Yeah, I think that's very interesting. So in these cases and the ones that you discussed specifically about the messenger kids, I would have clear instructions to folks. I would just say that if you're handling sensitive data, read the law and implement it at an engineering level. So this looks very simple to say, but it's difficult to do. So you should look at the law, what it says, and you should really know at an engineering level. So if you say that you are not sending a kid's audio data to a third-party advertising platform via your app, you need to actually verify this at the code level. Anything less than that is a gamble on someone's data and as well as a gamble on the law. And we can see this now. At this point, the fines are hitting hard. We discussed, again, rolling back to the DSAR issue, the data subject access request. We saw that the case judged that you need to provide all of your data, not a summary of it. So similar in this case, if the law says that you should not send a kid's audio data to a third party, you should not send it. You should verify this inside the code. I think that's the first thing that I would tell folks. So all manual reports, whatever you do is fine. All boxes look ticked when you look at your privacy program. Everything looks fine, but the still data would leak unless it is actually verified inside code at a very core engineering level. Yep, that's what I would
Good.
say.
So this is the kind of idea of shifting everything left, as they call it, trying to introduce
Yep.
the privacy controls into the core of your product. So you're not going back into a very messy system and trying to distinguish what data is what. You kind of, that's inherent to the product itself. This is also privacy or data protection by design issue, I suppose.
Yep. It intersects all of them. Yep.
Great. Thank you, Suchakra. I will just mention this as well briefly. There's a couple more items in the newsletter that I wrote about that happened over the previous week. Clearview AI, who I've been following very closely for several years, they've had a very bad week. So the main item on Clearview, France has fined this company. So this is, in case for anyone that doesn't know, this is a New York-based company, and they collect facial images from the internet, they scrape the web, and they collect billions of facial images, and they derive biometric information from those images. They've got a database of biometric information, and they charge organizations, let's say, just public sector law enforcement now, they tell us, but it has been lots of different types of companies previously. They charge for access to this biometric database so people can find criminal suspects, for example. Now, this is not good in the EU, and a lot of EU regulators have issued fines against Clearview, including the French Data Protection Authority, known as the CNIL. And they issued a 20 million euro fine against Clearview back in October. They just hit them with another 5.2 million euros because Clearview haven't paid. They haven't done what the French have asked them to do. Now, I don't know how much Clearview will be bothered by this because they maintain that they are not subject to the jurisdiction of European regulators. That will be tested soon in the UK courts and has been tested in Australia as well. That's another case against them this week. And in Austria, they had another bad decision. So do keep an eye on Clearview if you're interested in surveillance and privacy. Very interesting to see how regulators are responding. So let's move on to our main item now. We are talking about AI governance, and we're going to focus in a bit on algorithmic impact assessment. So this is Suchakra's area of expertise, more so than mine. So Suchakra, can you give me a bit of a one-liner about AI governance in your words? What is it, and are
Mhm.
people paying enough attention to this?
So I think the biggest thing that's happening these days that we are all seeing is mass aggregation of data. That has been happening for a long time. We used to call it big data, or different terminologies, data analysis, and all that. But what is happening right now is we can use this data to automatically create models. They do a lot of inference, and some interesting decisions are going to be made, which are going to affect people. So AI governance is the stream that is coming up, where there are regulations that are being drafted on how this data should be used. If decisions are going to be made based on trained models on AI, on based on this data, then what should be in those models? Uh, are those decisions being overseen? What is a good decision? What is a bad decision? So there are regulations that are being drafted on what is supposed to be done. So that sort of whole sphere is essentially what AI governance is. It's regulations that will be imposed eventually on anything that makes automated decisions.
Good. So you mentioned there you don't actually hear the term big data that much anymore. I mean, it's just
Yep.
a year ago. I'm sure I was
Yep.
writing about big data. It seems to have dropped out of the public lexicon a bit, that term. So the amassing of lots and lots of data, AI governance refers to the right way to handle that data, I suppose, and the right way to the approach to outcomes, decisions made via that data. Um, and when do you think the public, because we do hear a lot about AI governance and AI ethics
Mhm.
this year in particular, since a certain product launched late last year, when did the public first start becoming aware of the potential for AI to cause harm, do you think?
So I think there is an incident that comes to my mind, and I'm sure there might be other incidents also. I think it's about the YouTube's algorithm in itself, because YouTube's algorithm has been the first thing that has used artificial intelligence in the background to give you videos to watch. So as the algorithm that the people have been calling it. So one fine day, it suddenly started showing some explicit content to YouTube's kids platform. So they have another platform, YouTube Kids, which has kids centric data, which is not marred with other stuff that is on YouTube. So suddenly it started showing explicit content there, and there was no intervention from anyone, not neither a developer, no, nothing was tuned. It automatically started showing this. So I think this is the first thing that people started seeing. Okay, there is something automatic that was working, and it started behaving the way we didn't want it to behave.
That's a really neat example, I think, because it kind of shows a runaway system in a way.
Yep.
And you can't say, well, it's the AI's fault
Yep.
because it's designed by humans and it should be monitored by humans if there's a chance of something like that going wrong. It brings to mind, actually, for me, this started, I think, in the early 21st century, maybe 2005 or six, in Holland, in the Netherlands. There was and it was going on for a long time. The processing of child benefit payments for welfare payments.
Hmm.
Um, a lot of people, because of errors in the algorithm used for this process, were accused of fraud, and there was a disproportionate impact on certain groups too. This bias presented itself in the data. So it was immigrant communities, people of color, and so on. What about I think that this stuff went a bit more mainstream, as it were, with the ex Google engineer Temnit
Timnit
uh,
Gebru. Yeah.
Could you tell us a little bit, just for a minute or two, about that while we think about the history of all this?
Yeah, I have a little context on that, not too deep, but what I can say is that there was a division inside Google which was looking at AI ethics, how we are training the data, how this is supposed to be used. What would the model be okay? You know, are we looking at the context around the model that has been trained and the results it gives us? There was a group in that, and Timnit was there in it. But then soon, I think they axed the whole group or maybe part of it. This clearly was showing intentions of some large corporations around how they were not very interested in regulating what happens to the training data as well as what the AI is supposed to produce. I guess it ties it back to AI governance. So there has to be some sort of governance that comes either from inside the organizations or it comes from governments that are handling, or working with these organizations. So I think that's essentially what it is, and it now gives segue and I would say an opportunity to the whole society to build some governance tooling around AI.
Good. So let's get into some specifics then. First, can you identify the sorts of harms and risks that AI governance tries to prevent?
Yeah, I think the big cry of our times, I would say, is the diminished capability of humans now to really differentiate between what is true information and what is false information. Because true and false is getting mixed. The misinformation line is getting blurred more and more. I think that's what I see, and a lot of this is driven by algorithms and AI behind them. So I think that's the biggest challenge I would see, biggest big risk. Another risk is very clear again, is that the models that we are training, the more modern AI models that we are training, we have little or no understanding around the context on how we are training them, the data that is coming in from them. And these may propagate some very inherently flawful human models that are there. For example, humans have been discriminating against certain groups in between them for quite some time. And then, if we are training on those models or information derived from those models, so this will propagate. And what might happen is you could actually check the human's decision based on the history of what they have been doing. But now, because this is all getting inside a computer model, you could just sweep this under the rug and say it's the objective truth of a computing machine. So there's nothing wrong in this. So I think that's a very tricky situation we might be facing, or cornering ourselves in, I would say.
Yes, good. Okay, so trying to one thing is to try to steer people away from that tendency to blame the computer, as it were. Talk about the objective truth of the model of the AI, and there is a method for determining the risks and possible mitigations of AI systems. The algorithmic impact assessment,
Yeah.
which we're going to talk about. So tell us a bit about that, Suchakra, and give us the Canadian context, because I understand something
Yeah.
interesting is happening over there.
Yeah, so yeah, I'm in Canada, so I can give you more detailed context here. So there are some regulations that are being drafted right now in Canada around AI governance. So, for example, Canada now has something which they're calling it as the Directive on Automated Decision Making, which is going to be applied to any tool that is going to use AI-assisted technology in decision making. So, for example, let's see, a company wants to work with the Canadian government, and it is qualifying people for social assistance checks. Similar to what you were discussing with Netherlands. What this means is that a government-funded service is going to impact people, and statistical decisions could now be made using AI. So we again enter a territory where it's not humans anymore, and we are training, and things go in a black box, and suddenly a decision comes out of it. So in this case, the company engaging with the government has to perform something which they are calling as algorithmic impact assessment, AIA. It's kind of like a questionnaire. So you have to ask a question assessment of the you have to do some assessment of the AI algorithm itself, the data model, and the data which was used to train. And there would be questions like this. So, will you maintain a log detailing all of the changes made to the model in the system? Will the system be able to produce reasons for its decisions or recommendations when required? Does the system enable human override of this system decision? Is there a process in place to log the instances when the human overrides were done? So there are all these questions which give you like an assessment score on whether your system is okay or not to be included. So you have to assess your algorithms. You have to assess the data that was used to train them. So this is coming up. It's very new, but the fact that the government is saying that we want to look at the models much more closely when you engage with us. That says that AI governance is going to catch up pretty soon.
Good. So this is you describe it as a sort of questionnaire. So it sounds
Mhm.
actually a relatively simple process. The answers, of course, might be very
Yep.
complex. And this is for government contractors in Canada.
Yeah.
This is what they're
Yeah.
trying. Do you think we might see this kind of governance requirements expand into other? These are obviously private sector actors, but working with
Yeah.
the government. Do you think we might see it applied more widely to AI systems?
Yeah, I think it is possible, because one government is understanding that what might happen with AI, and the decisions might become too opaque, to have any log on why these were taken. So in that sense, they are going to definitely, like a lot of governments are going to definitely want this in their systems, proper assessments of algorithms. And there's, I would say, there's no escape to it. It's just a matter of fact when it happens. It is actually just going to happen, you know anyways. It might start getting more interesting in the next few months, I would say, as EU also starts working on AI models assessments, and US is also looking into it more closely. I would say like California is more interested at this point.
Yeah, so the EU actually, there's been a bit of movement on the AI Act or the AI regulation in the EU. The Parliament today agreed on their kind of position on this. So the EU process is all very long and complicated, but it looks like we might have this AI Act in place in Europe. I say Europe, it's not going to be in the UK. By the end of this year, which is
Wow.
really this mammoth piece of legislation. It's really it's complicated, and at the heart of it, I mean, they don't call them algorithmic impact assessments, but a lot of AI providers and users are going to have lots of those sorts of obligations. So looking at how the system collects data, looking at data preparation and processing, looking at the assumptions around the system, the data availability. This is all classic data governance sort of language, data quality,
Mhm.
and looking at biases, looking at errors in the data, and also explaining the logic of the system. And like Canada, this is for high risk AI systems, but that's
Yep.
quite a broad definition. It's not just government contractors, although a lot of those high risk applications are in public sector, immigration, education, but job
Mhm.
applications too, those kinds of AI processing with big effects that are already partly covered by the GDPR, of course, with its automated decision making rules. So a lot changing in this area. Even smaller AI providers and users will definitely be impacted by this stuff soon. And I think it's a good time really to sort of, well, what would be your advice Suchakra. Let's say I run a small business, I
Mhm.
want to get on the right foot with AI governance. What's the first step if I want to start thinking about my company's approach to this stuff?
So I would say, like, first look at the local laws, and as the laws are coming up, because you might have to comply with them. If you don't do it right now, it would be very difficult later on to really understand. Because if you're using AI, you're going to train your models. You're going to use existing models. So if you don't look at them right now, how what data you were using to collect them, what was inside the data, is the data biased, is the decisions coming out from the system biased? If you didn't do it early on, you're going to have problems later on. So all that, I would say, is relevant. Ensuring that the data that is inside the systems remains anonymized as well. It should not have, like the models themselves should not contain private data that could be escaped, when it is being asked to. And again, then having like fairer decisions coming out from the models, and a way to judge if those decisions are going to be fair. So doing these proper assessments of your algorithms, your data, your trained models, and the process of training those models, I think those all are important at this point.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much, Suchakra. We've overrun very slightly, so I'll wrap up here. Thank you so much to Privado for making these weekly events happen. Privado is, of course, Privado AI, a developer-friendly privacy platform that helps enterprises bridge the privacy engineering gap. They do privacy code scanning, so that really embeds privacy in the product development life cycle. This is what we keep coming back to, getting this stuff right at the earliest possible stage. So fantastic talk to you, Suchakra. We'll be back next week, possibly with another Privado person, and there's going to be a lot to talk about. We've got a big decision coming up about data transfers this afternoon, I think. So I expect I'll mention that next week. Hope to see you all then. Thank you.
Okay, thanks a lot, Robert.